Okay, so good evening, everybody. Here we are again on another webinar. Today is April the 10th. Happy post-Easter to everybody. And today we actually have two guests in our webinar, and one of them is Deb Falzoi. She's actually the president of End Workplace Abuse, and we are waiting for Stuart Maper, which is the collaborator on our Workplace Psychological Safety Act that we're trying to pass on all the 50 states. So to start today, I want Deb to introduce herself. I did put your bio on the comments on Facebook, so everybody can read them. But if you can tell us a little bit about yourself until Stuart logs in.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Dee. I have been working on legislation to end workplace bullying for about a decade now. I started a group called Dignity Together, or I should actually say it's a coaching. I do coaching for both individually and in groups to connect people on workplace bullying and the trauma that happens around this, for them to be able to really validate each other and understand the playbook that happens with this and be able to detach from what's happening. So I'm one of the co-founders also of End Workplace Abuse. I'm in Massachusetts, and I've worked on trying to pass legislation here for about the same time for years now. And a lot of this is education on what this is, because workplace abuse is not a household term. We are trying to make it one, and we are trying to grow a national movement around making this widely known, so that when it happens to people, they can first name what's happening to them, and then also get information about it online, connect with other people around what's happening to them, and feel supported in the abusive power that's happening.
So Deb, I know that I met you a couple of years ago while I was actually going through some of my trauma, both dealing with the military, the armed services, and also dealing with Customs and Border Protection, specifically with United States Border Patrol. And at the time, you are correct. It was Dignity Together. And then we kind of like, went up sort of like our own way, just, because different of opinions. And we really wanted a bill that, number one, could educate the people on what workplace abuse really is. And we wanted for it to be a little bit more comprehensive and get it right, from the beginning. So, we go back to discrimination laws, right? Like they cover the 5 classes. And I think that one of the major problems that the discrimination laws have is that they're weak laws, right? Like 99% of the times they go against the employee and they go in favor of the employer. And at the time that, it's just an uphill battle. It's very emotional, physical, and mentally exhausting. And I think that, a lot of us came together, and we kind of like found a safe net, like a safe space in where, even though all our stories were not the same, they sort of like validated each other, right? Because for the longest time, I thought that I was crazy. I thought that I was just like losing it. Like, I'm like, what did I did wrong? So it's kind of like that imposter syndrome. And it wasn't until I actually started listening to other people's stories that I realized that, this is more, this is a culture, this is like more normal, and it happened every single day than people, realize it. Now, the question that I have for you is, why has it been so difficult to pass legislation whenever, we talk about civil rights and we talk about human rights?
My personal take on it is that you know, in our culture, employers just have way too much power. And so when they are involved at all in the legislative process, or they have the ear of legislators, um, who also often are part of a toxic culture themselves, it's really hard to go up against that organizational corporate power. They have more resources, they have, the ability to control the narrative. And um if we look at history, they basically have historically had the power and had that ability to control the narrative. And it requires people coming together to collectively to change the narrative and even move the needle a little bit, because that power is so focused or centered at the top. And then on top of it, like you've mentioned with anti-discrimination, we have this culture that is built on a hierarchy based on stereotypes. And it's a huge challenge. Often those, we're fed through the media all of these images and stories that perpetuate these stereotypes. And it's a challenge for us to go against that internally, and recognize our own personal power, but also challenge the cultural stereotypes around groups of people. um we're talking about bullying and abuse at work, which can happen to anybody, but there's such an overlap with discrimination, where it affects people of color more than white people, and women more than men. And because those groups have historically not had the voice, or not been able to control the narrative, that's my take on how this has been such a challenge to take that narrative, to take our narrative, and to explain, how we view things. And also, workplace abuse is such an isolating phenomenon where, we tend to internalize what's happening to us and isolate ourselves as we're processing the emotions around it, the betrayal trauma, being betrayed by our boss and then our employer, and then the culture in general that doesn't say that this is um, that there's anything wrong with this behavior. So I
Well,
think.
it's accepted even, like you look at the school system, right? And then
Mhm.
you have the children bullying other children, or the teachers bullying the children, or vice versa. And like nobody takes responsibility, right? Like parents want to protect their children, but at the same time, they don't correct the behavior whenever their own child is actually, engaging in the behavior. So, I think that it's, in my opinion, I think that it's, you know, the community as a whole, right? Because they have accepted the behavior like it's okay. And what I see the problem in school is whenever a child accept bully behavior from another adult or another, classmate, they go to the workplace with those uh those experiences. And then I think that that's why they become isolated, right? Because they feel like it's their fault, right? But it's because they have lived with it for such a long time, and they have not compartmentalized, how you say that, whenever like you try to put things on your brain like in different areas, so you don't have all that trauma, like your head trying to explode, with all those um, living experiences.
Yeah, I completely agree with you that it's so normalized at such a young age. And even though we have, there are some school bullying laws, just culturally, there's so much bullying, and there's so many false narratives that keep people maintaining their power. I always say too that the people in power write the rules to keep themselves in power. So it's just this, the culture maintains itself, and it there's a benefit to maintaining this bully culture for the people who are engaging in bullying. So it's, yeah, that piece of it, that whole, cultural piece, and then it trickling down to so many aspects of our culture is just,
You know,
it's feels
and
like
I
it's
know, yeah, and I know that a lot of us actually testified last year with the Dignity at Work Act in Massachusetts. And I don't know, I mean, in my opinion, the bill was not that weak. I mean, it had some, power behind it. I don't know if the committee let it die. I don't know if they just didn't want it to deal with it, because obviously, it's like the status quo, right? Like you don't want to tell employers, hey, you're doing this wrong and you're going to be held accountable, right? And also because, if there's opportunities for lawsuits, obviously, where does the money comes from? But in my opinion, and my experience has been obviously, I mean, whenever I was in school, college, obviously I was not working for the government, but like the majority of my experiences have been with the government. And the government is such a monster. It's kind of like they protect each other till death, till death. And I think that we isolate ourselves because like our own coworkers, the those same people that we trusted and we uh believed in them betray us, right? Like they make you feel like it's your fault instead of trying to understand, what happened, how did it develop, and how did the person ended up where they at that specific time. Like, we have always said that sympathy is not the same thing of having empathy for someone, right? And there's a huge difference between listening to somebody and hearing somebody because it's not the same thing. And I know that like, for example, like the workplace in the federal government, they have the employee assistance program. And in my opinion, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work because it's behind closed doors and basically CYA for the agency, right? Like they want you to go and see these counselors, for them to try to find something to say, oh, it's not our fault. It's something that happened to that individual whenever they were little or whenever they were in high school. It doesn't have anything to do with the workplace. And I know that, nowadays, they have taken, especially the subject of mental health injury, because it's not a disease, okay? People that have mental health issues did not, most of the people that have issues on the workplace that have been traumatized and they have mental health issues, they're not crazy. There's no paranoia. It's just that they have been traumatized with a catastrophic event that their brain was not able to process it, right? And because the denial from the people that they work with or the people that are above them or below them, it's like they're like in this hole, like in a cave, right? Like very dark. And it's really hard to get away from that spot. I remember, you know, uh, I still deal with it, right? But like before I actually started finding people that have had the same or not the same, but similar experiences that I have, I was not able to understand it. Because counselors can only listen to you. Counselors are not going to tell you what to do, or all they do is give you medication, and then one medication causes another problem, right? I know that we have couple of states that we have been able to introduce the bill, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm not mistaken, we have Texas, we have New York, Rhode Island, Philadelphia, and Massachusetts. Am I miss Oregon,
We
right?
have yeah, so the bill language that we think is the strongest is in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and then a few other states have introduced legislation that we would like to improve upon, that I believe is more employer pro-employer. But that's in New York, Pennsylvania, Oregon, Texas. We're trying to do that
Is
work.
that because they're more democratic states, meaning they have union, like labor unions?
It's more in the history of the legislation and there being an initial campaign um, called the Healthy Workplace Bill that had introduced the bill in numerous states, and it still exists in a couple of states. And so where that bill still exists right now, that's in New York and Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts. We have our own bill, but that other bill still exists there. They're calling for a couple of things that we um, think could harm employees, specifically requiring proof of intent that does not work with sexual harassment law, and also proof of health harm, which is similar. And like you talked about earlier, if an employer is controlling the process, they can rig the process, and they often do. And so if they are sending you to a physician who they pay for, they can, determine that the cause of the psychological injury was anything but the workplace, because they don't want the liability. So um we think that those two elements would be problematic, and they also are regressive because they're not, there were two landmark cases in the 80s and 90s that said that, in order for a case to be, or in order for a target of sexual harassment to have a legal claim, they simply have to prove that there is a hostile work environment, and they don't have to prove that there was psychological injury. So we're modeling our bill off of that idea, where if the target can prove that there's a baseline of a toxic work environment or an abusive work environment, um, then they can have a legal claim. They don't have to prove that. We don't want to wait till their health is harmed in order for them to file a claim. Um, and they should not have to tolerate a toxic work environment. So if a reasonable person would claim that the work environment is toxic, then that's the baseline for them to have a legal claim. So um yeah,
Well,
this
and it's sort of like harassment, right? Like you can be like you and I can be standing in a room, right? And I can be harassed by somebody else, right? And I might not, I'll be like, oh, that's not harassment to me, but to you it is, because of maybe like an experience that you have had, or maybe the knowledge that you have on the subject, or because especially like I have always been involved in workplaces that the majority of employees are male, right?
Mm.
And even though individuals say things jokingly, most of the times they do mean what they say. And if you accept it from one individual, then you have to accept it like it's okay. And then it becomes a pattern, right?
yeah, we see this operate as a playbook,
Mhm.
and we actually put this into our materials, educating people on how this playbook works. So, and this is built on looking at the actual research out there. So they say that a workplace bullying, a workplace abuse situation can often happen or start with some sort of conflict, and it's very often between a boss and a subordinate. And this isn't always the case, but it is often the case where the subordinate will be a high performer, somebody who has great work ethic, great ethics, and that those elements will pose a threat to the boss, who also not always the case, but can typically be an incompetent boss, and they're
Mhm.
threatened by the competence of the subordinate. And when they perceive that person as a threat, they start to control the narrative and start to control the narrative with the target, who starts to internalize these messages, but also the larger group, the department, or the other coworkers. And then um a lot of people say, how do I know what's being said in the you know, being said about me? And the truth is, they don't. It's not until, some a bystander tells them, or somehow they find out information, usually pretty far into the process, and then they go to HR or a higher up, believing that their organization is against toxic behavior, because the target typically supports the organizational agenda, whereas the perpetrator supports their own personal agenda. And that's what we call mobbing, where um, it adds that second layer of betrayal, where HR typically focuses on avoiding liability, and then they typically ignore complaints, or they might retaliate against the person, believing that original false narrative. And it's especially common when someone speaks up. Um, that's speaking up is required in order to make that complaint to HR. But where it becomes, it's one thing for there to be a toxic boss, and the employer, if if the employer has a healthy work culture, then they will actually deal with the toxic boss and do an investigation and coach or counsel or discipline that person. But there's no accountability for employers. So unless it's discriminatory, and that's a whole other beast, really, because they have to prove discriminatory intent. And discrimination law has become less effective over the years, moving from needing to prove discriminatory impact to intent in the 80s and 90s. So if the person is left in that toxic work environment, the stressors mount, and they're put in a position to eventually have to decide between their own health and a paycheck. And if they choose their health and leave the paycheck, sometimes they're also, you know, like walking away from both of them, because it really depends on what sort of safety net they have. So, if you have a spousal income that you can rely on, or a trust fund, or some sort of savings that will take you through till you can find another job, um, there's probably still some trauma that you're experiencing, but it's far less severe than somebody who's living paycheck to paycheck. And then they'll have to rely on taxpayer dollars, potentially TANF and food stamps and section 8 housing, and taxpayer dollars to survive. And so essentially, employers are, um when they don't tend to employee well-being internally, they're pushing the costs onto taxpayers to deal with it. People using ERs as their health care. And so the other thing is, a lot of people don't realize what's happened to them until they're out of the workplace. They can start to heal, they start to educate themselves about how this playbook works. And the trauma just mounts, and they when they realize that third layer of betrayal with the culture, the legal system isn't on their side. We have not said as a society that this is not okay. Then there's, that trauma just mounts. So I think people really understanding that toxic work or toxic employers operate on this rigged system. um I think that can be really helpful for people to understand when they're trying to detach from what happened to them, and not internalize it as much. And I think that can really help with people's healing and being able to speak up about, to their legislators that we need change, and um, this is not okay. This is not a way to treat people. I mean, that's really what it comes down to is, if we care about our organizations and our economy, and then we need to center people. We need to care about human well-being, and I think that's it seems like it just gets more and more lost, that as organizations care more about their profits than people, then it actually hurts their bottom line, with absenteeism, turnover, presenteeism, which is showing up to work and being checked out,
You know,
legal
I mean,
expenses.
and it seems so easy, right? Because I mean, that's like one-on-one management.
Yeah.
And it's like I always say, there's a big difference between being a manager and being a leader. Because whenever you're a leader, you need followers. If you don't have nobody following you, you you're not a leader of anything. But a manager manage paperwork, right? Like everything is basically inside an office, inside four walls. And something that you say about HR, like HR, which are the people that deals with, like Department of Labor claims, and health insurance claims and all that stuff, right? Like you said it right. They are there to protect the liability from the agency or the department or whatever company they are. That's what they get paid. And I remember one time, and I didn't know this. I actually learned this whenever I filed my first discrimination case against my agency. Representatives that work for the equal opportunity that represents the agency get bonuses every time that they close a discrimination case, which is bizarre because these are the same people that you have to go to file a complaint against your boss or against the agency or department. And then, legislators and, management ask, why the suicide numbers have increased. And I think that people are like drowning, right? Like they're tired, they're exhausted, like they have all these resources, but there's nothing they can do with them because there's not a process, there's not a system in place for them to go, right? And I know that I was talking with Stuart, we saw this article about this legislator at this, the state of Texas legislation that um, actually was reported for, having a toxic work environment in her elected office, and some people actually left the workplace. So I think that it has to happen to them for them to be able to realize that, this is real. This stuff happen. Like Texas Attorney General Paxton, right? A couple of years ago, there were some whistleblowers that blew the whistle on some alleged, right? Because I was not there, but alleged misconduct. And then obviously because he's running again for office, he settled the case. But this is the thing, this is how I think. If you don't have nothing to hide, why not fight, right? And then the excuse was that it was going to cost the taxpayers money or more money if they will have continued, with the case in court, which to me doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, there's so many aspects of this that, the ability, for example, like you mentioned, for serial abusers to be able to use non-disclosure agreements to hide the toxic behavior, and then they can just go on and you know misbehave with the next person. And so, yeah, there's so many layers to this. There's also at will employment, where unless you live in Montana, you are at the will of your employer, which means that they can fire you for any reason or no reason at all, as long as it's not discriminatory. And that's, that's even debatable, because it can be hard to prove discrimination. So um, there's so many aspects, and on our website and workplaceabuse.com, we actually have identified over 20 different bills that are being introduced across the country in states, both on state levels and on the federal level, that will hopefully help move the needle. So addressing non-disclosure agreements, addressing at will employment, addressing paid leave, wage transparency, so many aspects of this that are forms of abuse that really just points to the fact that we as workers in the United States just don't have a good baseline of rights, especially if you compare us to other countries where they have passed, laws about workplace bullying, and
Well,
yet
Puerto Rico, Puerto Rico, which is a territory, not even a state, they have
yeah,
laws against, workplace bullying.
yeah, yeah. In the interesting part is it's such an epidemic here. I mean, there's studies that you know say that the percentage of people who've been bullied during their careers ranges from like 20 something all the way up to 90 something. But in Massachusetts, we did a survey of public employees a couple of years ago, and the respondents, it was overwhelming that it was around 67% of people reported that they had been bullied during their careers. And we listed some of the most common behaviors like false accusations, sabotage, exclusion, um, and there was really a lot of commentary about, the losses that have gone along with this. Is, they're from the losses around physical health, anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder is huge with this, suicidal ideation, um just the mental health aspect of this, the financial losses around this. People had lost, major amounts of money. um this is really like an attack on our personhood. So the amount of losses to self-worth and careers, and you know all the educational history people have had, sometimes that can just go right out the window when they've been pushed out of their industry. And so it really, especially if people, um es- especially if somebody's job or career is a big part of their identity, this can really hit them hard. And we've seen suicides around this. People feel trapped, like you said earlier. There's nowhere to go. We have so many employers who will say, or talk about what they value, and they'll have this mentality of, workplace bullying or, toxic behavior happens, but it just doesn't happen here. And people are misled to believe that the internal process will work for them because they're going to trainings about anti-discrimination, and they're reading their policies about that. But then when they go to make a complaint, even about illegal discrimination, the HR department, more often than not, like you said, they work for the employer. They will figure out how to vilify the person and push them out so that that threat of liability goes out the door with them. And it really just comes down to the fact that people shouldn't have to go to work and feel um, unsafe psychologically. They should be able to go to work, do their jobs, especially if they're the people who are, the high performers and care about the success of the organization. These organizations are just doing themselves a huge injustice by not addressing this, but we are, doing a huge injustice to people, especially people in protected classes, um, who don't have uh, any, you know who can't find protection in anti-discrimination law, and there's nowhere to go. There's nothing that will hold their employer accountable.
And like I have been at the, obviously at the private sector, both with Customs and Border Protection and, the military. And I tell you, like in the military, like if you file a discrimination case, right? A discrimination complaint, it stays within the service. There's no court that you can go to and appeal it. So it goes to the same, the complaints go to the same people that engage in the bad behavior. We saw that with, the I am Vanessa Guillen case, and that's the reason because the legislation passed, where this sexual harassment, federal crimes were going to be reviewed by an external body instead of the army. But, I feel like we are so reactive, right? Like something major catastrophic has to happen before, some legislator pass some sort of law or enact a specific law. Like I was telling my dad, we were talking about, the 10 Commandments, right? And obviously I am not perfect, by no means. But it's like we have so many laws. And I think that if we follow the 10 Commandments, it should be pretty easy, right? So I feel like being in legislature kind of like you justify your purpose to be there every time that you introduce a bill. But most of the bills are not even, they don't even pass. It's like it takes years and years to pass one simple bill. And most of the time, well, what I have experienced and seen is that there's no accountability. Even if there's a law, even if there's an established law, there's no accountability, there's no justice, there's no consequence, there's nothing. There's no transparency. Like we have all these books, I remember like in the military, we have all these standard operating procedures and we have them on binders and they were on a shelf and nobody ever looked at them. And I'm like, why do we even write this stuff if nobody
Yeah.
even look at it?
Yeah, they're not like worth the paper they were written on if no one's enforcing, what's happening. Yeah, I see this so much. Um, you know, Part of the legislative process is checks and balances, and it does take years to build advocacy and get support around an issue. But at the same time, um, the our state houses are also workplaces, and they, very often have power focused at the top, and we elect people to um, represent us, but they're only as effective as kind of their ranking within the legislature. So um, yeah, this issue just it's like reveals itself in so many layers of the advocacy aspect, the workplace itself. It's just that abuse of power and chipping away at it. um
But with the number of suicides that we have, right? Like if we really look at the children in school, we have these murders and we have this shooting. I mean, shouldn't it be like 101 for people? Like, hey, we have a problem for them to do something.
yeah, you would think so. It like a lot of, yeah, the school shootings too. I mean, a lot of those cases can be traced back to bullying or isolating people. Yeah, there's so much that points to this, and yet we're not doing anything about it.
How
I
many
think
years you've been trying to pass to for somebody to pass a bill regarding bullying and mobbing and gaslighting and all that stuff?
for me it's been 10. But I know that at least, in Massachusetts, it's for paid FMLA to pass. It took about 20 years. I've heard of another OSHA related bill that took like 17 years. So I know that this is a long haul. I know that it's, an uphill
But
push.
even then, they don't enforce them, right? So the bills are there, they passed legislation, they became law, but there's still no accountability. Because I remember that I had to file, for an FMLA violation against my employer because they were not following, the same laws that we're reading in the federal government.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, why I continue to have hope is that I think once we make workplace abuse a household term and pass a law, or hopefully 50 laws or a federal law eventually, when enough states pass this, um it will help with the prevention side, which I think, we know sexual harassment law or no law has the ability to like eradicate a problem, but at least if we can move the needle on this and make workplaces safer, for the organizations that want to do the right thing, or even are operating in fear of being held accountable, at least it will move the needle and allow people who've been abused at work to know that at least the legal system is on their side in some capacity, even if it's not getting enforced properly. um Even for this first step of the culture, of society saying this is a problem, and who will help people um detach from it more and say, okay, give them some type of validation. um you know Obviously, as the years go by, and seeing how it plays out, and maybe strengthening the bill somehow, or passing other laws, like, or other bills into law, like I mentioned, that will also help around this issue and give workers a better baseline of rights. I mean, yeah, unfortunately, these things just take a long time and a lot of people. And but I have hope. I mean, I have hope that with education, people will know that this is a thing, and it's not just, I hear from so many people saying, I thought this was just me, or they've been
Mhm.
gaslit into thinking that they are the problem, and it's not until they realize that a lot of other people are experiencing this that they can get, and that it has a name, that they can get some kind of relief from it. And it is a challenge with the collectively acting together, because it's so isolating, and because people have been convinced that they're at fault for what is happening to them. And it makes it a different type of issue to speak out about, because it's workplace bullying is designed to silence us. So um yeah, we've got a road ahead of us.
Well,
But
I'm very, I know that, we were able to get Cesar Blanco, to introduce the bill. I did spoke with his staff, and I did mention that, that we wanted the bill to be a little bit stronger. Um, uh, I think that Stuart said that the committee meets next Wednesday. I don't know how many times they meet, but he didn't see it in the agenda. So he was going to, to reach out to the committee and find out what's the status of it. And I guess that the committee chairman decides, which bills to hear at the committee meetings. I mean, I was under the impression that once a bill gets to a committee, it gets heard, right? And it either passed the committee or it doesn't pass the committee. So I don't know. I'm just hopeful, right? That because at least in Texas, I don't know how is it in Massachusetts, but in Texas, they only meet for like 4 to 5 months every 2 years. So, not too many things get done. I mean, and I know that some of the bills have passed the committee, and they have been approved by the Senate, but then now they have to go to the House, and we have one that is Democratic and the other one is Republican. So it's kind of like, I don't know. I just know, for the longest time, I was, I mean, and still to this day, I feel very alone. Um, because, it's hard to explain to people. It's hard to explain, it's not like whenever you get cut on your arm, right? Like you can see the cut, like being bullying and mobbing and being gaslighted. It's like an internal emotion that people cannot see. And I know, at least I mean, I work with two amazing agents on midnights, and both of them, committed suicide because they were just drowning, and it's just so hard to get people to understand, like we have a major problem, and it's like the issues are going to continue. I know that, it's like I tell people, they can believe in whatever God Almighty, Allah, Buddha, whatever they want to believe, right? But I mean, I know that I didn't born out of a leaf in a tree, right? So, but we took the Bible out of the schools. Same thing with history. Like we don't teach we don't teach the Constitution to our kids. We don't teach history, where we came from. Everything nowadays is so digital, and it's just, I am so I love children, but I am so glad that I never had any children, because I think that, I mean, I'll be like Miss Cup all the time, like very protective, right? Because of everything that I have experienced in life. Um, I'm just hopeful that these legislators and elected officials open their eyes to what's really happening, because I mean they are destroying our nation one by one, and and then they count on people like us, that we have a strong voice, but at the same time that we voice our opinion to save others, it's like it's mentally, emotionally, and physically exhausting, you know, trying to be the voice for others. But somebody has to do it, right?
Yeah,
So
I mean, just even thinking about how great it is that you're talking about this on your podcast, Dee, I mean, this, sometimes all it takes is one person to be
mhm.
listening and to um feel some sense of relief, or maybe not completely um
But the pain never goes away.
mm,
Yeah, the
yeah,
pain never goes away.
yeah,
It's like you have good days and you have bad days, and the memories and the traumas come and go, and people are never the same. They're never the same. I just, my only hope is to be the voice for those ones that don't have a voice, and kind of like educate people through my experience, right? Because I mean, I am still learning. I mean, for the longest time, I didn't know what was happening. I blame myself, you know, but it's like I was, at the same time, I was like, okay, so, how can I have all these awards, be the top on everything, and out of the sudden, I'm like the biggest piece of shit. It just doesn't make any sense, you know.
yeah,
And that's what they do, they try to, I don't know if it's envy, if it's jealousy, if it's like their ego gets hurt, right? But
yeah, yeah, a lot of ego and a lot of um like victim blaming
mhm,
too, where I think that's one of the challenges in this too, is people don't want to believe that this could also happen to them, and so it's easier to just tell ourselves, oh, well, this person must have done something to bring this on. Um, at the same time, so many people have experienced this that,
Well, and it's coming out little by little. You see on social media, people being exposed, people either being fired or forced to retire, or others are just running. They're running before the mess catch up with them. But
yeah,
I do believe in karma. I don't wish bad to other people at all. But I know that God is watching, and He does take care of the righteous. That I know because I have seen it over and over and over. You know. Um, I'm so sad that we miss Stuart.
I know.
Maybe I can do another one with him. But can you give us some final words? I know that the Zoom is usually like an hour, so I don't want them to cut us in the middle of something.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the big takeaway is that we can take action on this. Um, even sending a letter to your legislators can feel empowering with this. And that's what we need people to do. So people go to workplacepsychologicalsafetyact.org. They can scroll down on the homepage and find the map. And, even if you're not in a state where this bill has been introduced, you can take action by writing to the committee members. All you have to do is click on the state. Um, if you don't live in the state, there's a link to click to message the committee members, and you don't have to know who they are, what the talking points are. If you do want to modify the template letter we have in there, that's even better, but you don't have to. We're just looking for as many voices as possible to speak up, speak out about what you deserve, what kind of work environment we deserve to go in, and we need as many people as possible to take that specific action of emailing through our very quick easy tool that we have on that website, and speak up, use our voices. That's what that momentum that you know one person doing it and then another person doing it, that's what's going to actually create change and make workplace abuse a household term, and build this power that we need to um, go up against the people in power. There's this graphic of a big fish being able to eat a little fish, but if we have a lot of little fish, then we can actually have an impact on that big fish. So um never underestimate the even a small action that we can all take collectively to really try to chip away at this, because yeah, we all deserve to work in safe environments, but more than that, we all deserve to not have to deal with the trauma that comes after dealing with abusive power, because that's really what this is. And no industry is exempt. So I think people understand the power of their voices, then um, we can take this far.
Well, thank you for being with us today, Deb. It's nice having a conversation. I think that it's more real, than just one person talking all the time.
Yeah.
Uh,
Thanks so much for
and
doing.
and I appreciate everything that you have done. I mean, like I say, I used to attend the Zoom group sessions, and he helped me, listening to other people, and it's a journey, it's a healing process, and it just doesn't happen overnight. It has been years for me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I hope that you have a great night, and we'll keep pushing on Senator Blanco. I sent them an email today, but they were off for the holiday weekend. So we're supposed to be reaching out to them tomorrow. So hopefully they hear the bill at the committee on Wednesday. And all we need is one state. If we can get one state, then we get the second, one at a time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And thanks for all you do, Dee. Like,
oh, it's
refreshing to have your
thank you. It's just
passion.
it helps me to help others. my mom sometimes doesn't understand it, and it's like I tell her that's how I heal, but thank you for being here, and I'll see you.
Thanks, Steve.
Have a good night. Take care. Bye bye.